Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's Brown Bag presentation featuring Professor Emeritus Lee Hansen with his presentation, Estimating the Resource Costs of Minority and Disadvantaged Student Programs. If you haven't signed up for registration, we have a registration papers out in the hallway. If you could please sign that if you haven't done so already. That way we can send you a survey of our programs so we can get feedback directly from you, as well as we can send you information on upcoming programs and WISCAPE papers. My name is Noel Radomski. I'm the director of WISCAPE, and I want to thank a few of my colleagues here. Jason was there, Carrie, and Leslie, and Eleni, and Jay Stampin. So thank you, colleagues, for showing up. We are honored to have Professor Emeritus W. Lee Hansen here to discuss his latest paper. And let me give you a brief intro on Lee's background. Professor Hansen's undergraduate and master's degree programs are from UW-Madison, and his PhD in political economy is from the Johns Hopkins University. He taught at UCLA, served as a senior staff economist for the President's Council of Economic Advisors, was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Chicago, and has held visiting appointments at the London School of Economics, University of Sydney, and Maastricht University in the Netherlands. Professor Hansen has won numerous awards, including a Distinguished Teaching Award and the Hilldale Award for Distinguished Professional Achievement at UW-Madison. He has also been active in campus efforts to improve the quality of student writing. He is a member of AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, and CAFAR, the Independent Committee on Academic Freedom and Rights. He is also the editor of the book Academic Freedom on Trial, 100 Years of Sifting and Winnowing at the University of Wisconsin, which came out in 1998. And just a personal note, when I was a policy analyst in the Chancellor's office, I had an opportunity to meet with Lee and get a very interesting background on academic freedom on trial, which led me to the archives for several months as a grad student. So I especially want to thank Lee for bringing that to attention. If none of you have read this book, it's an excellent book. With that, Professor Lee Hansen, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me now properly? Fine, everybody? Good. The presentation last week by my colleague Bobby Wolf on the benefits of diversity prompted me to contact Noel and say I would like to follow up with something on the costs of diversity, more specifically the minority and disadvantaged programs that have been going on here for probably about almost 40 years. What I have done in this paper is to provide estimates of what I call the full resource costs of minority and disadvantaged student programs. Not of diversity, which is a much broader concept, but rather the minority and disadvantaged student programs. And what I show is that the official estimates put out by the UW system are way short of the actual total resources devoted to these programs. I also offer here several alternative measures of the per student costs of these programs, and I also accumulate the costs of these programs, the resource costs, over the duration of Plan 2008 from 1998 to 2008, and then for that same period plus the 5 years since then. And I've had to do a little extrapolation for the last year or two because the figures are not yet available from system. And finally, then I'd like to raise a few questions that I hope you will respond to and think about, because there are many unanswered questions about these programs. Now the question is, what is the dollar value of the resources devoted to minority and disadvantaged programs? let's call them M/D programs. Though university officials regularly extol the educational benefits of greater racial and ethnic diversity, they never mention the resource costs that give rise to these benefits, nor do they say anything about how these costs measure up against their benefits. The full resource costs of programs to enhance recruitment, retention, and graduation of minority students are not apparent in the UW system's minority and disadvantaged student annual reports. These come out once a year, usually about now, maybe April, maybe May, but the latest is not out. The data that appear in Table 1 of that report omit various expenditures. But after these expenditures are included, plus some other resource costs, the estimated cost rises for Madison from about $25 million to $40 million. In other words, there's $15 million of programs, resources that are not included in the official figures. For the UW system, the figure rises from about 50 million up to 90 million, and the same problem there. Now, what accounts for these differences? The annual M&D report acknowledges that certain expenditures and costs are excluded from these official published figures. One of them is fringe benefits. Fringe benefits is an obvious element of employee compensation. Why they're not included is not at all clear. Another is our various racially exclusive scholarships and grants. Again, why they're excluded is not clear. Expenditures by student government, now ASM, money that they set aside for various minority programs that they help support. Then there are some other excluded items that I call resource costs. One is the tuition remission for students in the PEOPLE program. This is not a budgetary item, but it means less revenue for the university and represents a resource cost. In addition, there is the resources devoted to supervising all of these minority disadvantaged programs. And there are about 60 of them, which you can find on a spreadsheet that I'll mention in a few minutes. So how do I get these additional numbers? The most important source of information is, in addition to the system report, there's the UW-Madison annual expenditure report, which comes out about now and gives detailed information on every category of budgeting going on in the university, departments, programs, et cetera. And great detail. The thing is about an inch thick and has a wealth of data in it. In addition to that, there's something that I call the M&D program spreadsheet. This is something compiled by the diversity office here on campus. Rudy Paredes has done this for years. And it shows for the 60 M&D programs, and oddly enough, the number 60 has remained almost invariant over the last 20 years, meaning the program, the whole thing strikes me as being rather static. Anyway, it shows for each of the programs by major revenue source its wage and salary expenditures and its other expenditures. Additional information I get from UW-Madison and system budget documents. Other information I've obtained from the staff of the diversity office. And I've had to resort to a lot of open records requests through the Office of Legal Services. And as a footnote, any request I make is treated as an open records request, and all of this has made it easier in some ways to get data, but in other ways harder because I can't make direct contact with many of the people who are involved. Now, the estimates for the UW system are probably not as solid as those for UW-Madison. And the problem is that there's no system to aggregate all of these data over all of the different units in the UW system. For the year 2008-9, and I started this project about 2 years ago when those were the most recent data, and for various reasons, this has dragged on much longer than I thought. Anyway, I was able to get these M&D spreadsheets from every campus in the system, and they provided the basis for the UW system estimates for 2008-2009. I later on extended this back to 1998, but doing this for the system would have required open records requests, several of them, to each of the 14, 15 campuses, and I thought that's too much for an old fellow like me. I'll leave that for someone else to do. Now, in putting together these numbers, I've tried to err on the conservative side, so I can't be accused of overstating the numbers. But nonetheless, these are estimates, and they're not perfect, and I hope that UW System and UW-Madison will rise to the occasion and do a complete report on this. Now, there are some problems simply with the title of the UW System report. And why don't you flip to this first one? A more accurate title of this report, which again goes back to the mid-1980s, instead of the Minority and Disadvantaged Student Annual Report, it should be retitled Targeted Minority Student Report. As the other documents make clear, the term disadvantaged is a very ambiguous one. There's no definition of it. There's no way to count who is disadvantaged. And the only people who are counted in Plan 2008 reports, pre and post, are minorities, African Americans, American Indians, Hispanics, and Southeast Asians. So those are the people who are called targeted minorities. And some may be disadvantaged, some may not be disadvantaged, but as the UW system admits, data contained in this report, the final report on Plan 2009 says, data contained in this report relate primarily to the 4 racial ethnic groups specified in Plan 2008. Data specifically on the economically disadvantaged are not available. Then the report says, however, all Plan 2008 goals and initiatives serve both racial ethnic groups and economically disadvantaged students. What that means is not at all clear. If you don't have a definition of disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged, you can't count the people, and so they fall back on what they can count, namely targeted minority students. Now, next please. The system report provides some detail on several categories of expenditures. And what I've done is to resort them, to divide them into what I call service programs that provide services to students as compared to financial aid programs. All of this information, of course, comes from the Provost's office in this annual minority diversity spreadsheet, plus some of the institutional scholarship data, which comes from a separate category and is reported by system. So what I show here are the data from the system report, 25 million for Madison, what is it? I need a rear view mirror here. 51 million for the UW system. So this is what I start with. But then there are these things which are omitted, and so this led me to the next slide, where I look at the service programs. I divide them out. And the only part of the service program that you find here are program expenditures 1 sub A. 15 million for UW-Madison, 39 for UW system. So then I have to add in the fringe benefits, which are not at all complicated to estimate. And indeed, I would think that they would be cranked out automatically. Segregated fee income, the student government has appropriated considerable amounts of money over the last decade or two for support of minority disadvantaged programs, and then an estimate of the supervisory costs because people do allocate time to this, and it's not necessarily counted, and so I've tried to make a crude estimate of that here. Well, then let's go on to so anyway, what you see here, of course, is this figure goes from 14.9 up to 20.4, from 39.1 to 56.0. Yes, sir?
Lee, can we go back to the prior slide where you have financial aid?
Yes.
So there is a big pot of money for needs-based financial aid. Needs means disadvantaged. Is all of that needs-based financial aid in your item 6 there?
I don't think so.
So what, if it's not I agree that the magnitude suggests that it's not there. So if it's not there, then what is there?
Yeah. What is there? Okay, it's coming back to me now. I have a spreadsheet on that financial aid programs figure. And these are specific monies that have been obtained for, let's say, the program in the law school, Hasty program, other designated programs, and I can't recite the list of them, but they're all very specific categories of money for need-based aid and minority-oriented. Now, you know, here you raise a good question because a lot of this stuff is very difficult to decipher. And I've had constant back and forth with open records and so on, trying to figure out exact details. But, you know, whatever you ask for, you get a tiny answer. And it's been difficult. I've been advised I should work through the legal office rather than contacting people directly. So some of this may be very imperfectly done. But these are minority programs that are specifically for different groups. Engineering is another one. Law and engineering. Maybe there might be one in business as well.
Okay.
All right. So then, let's see. Where are we now? We're on the. Let's go to the next one. The financial aid. So the financial aid programs include the category you've already mentioned. But then there's the Ben Lawton program, the undergraduate minority retention grant that was set up in about 1985 in honor of Ben Lawton, who was a prominent regent. And these monies are designated for undergrad students, sophomores, juniors, seniors, who are targeted minorities. And oddly enough, the money goes to students automatically without their realizing it. System recently did a review of the Lawton program and interviewed students, and no students are even aware that they're getting this money, which I found rather surprising. Another is the AOP program, Advanced Opportunity Program. This is a little bit ambiguous because there are some non-minorities who receive the money, but the funds go primarily to minority students and actually to graduate students. So this distorts somewhat the view that I'm taking to look at the impact on undergraduate students. These are two programs. There are a couple of others. One was from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, a program called the Pre-College Scholarship Program. In the year 2004, in response to a complaint to the Office for Civil Rights, the DPI signed an agreement that, yes, indeed, they were violating the law by having this racially exclusive program. It violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and they were forced to rename the program to call it the Pre-College Scholarship instead of the Pre-College Minority Scholarship Program. However, in looking into this, it appears that there are racial criteria still in place in the UW system, which runs these pre-college programs. And got a lot of evidence on that. So despite the fact the program is supposed to be race neutral, in fact, it remains racial preferences there. There's another one called the Talent Incentive Program, organized or offered by the Higher Education AIDS Board. In the fall of 2010, the Office for Civil Rights ruled that that program, too, violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They were forced to rename the program, et cetera. But nonetheless, it's not clear that this is even now a racially exclusive program. On the other hand, the dollar amount is not very great, and so I've included it here because I'm not clear about that. Yes?
So, we're in 2008, 9. If you're in this year, we have the Madison undergraduate edition. I assume almost all these programs reduce tuition. Seems to have
They what?
reduced tuition. Are they all tuition assistance?
I don't know.
Well, is that, I mean, part of what Bob is getting into is there is some general programs for the economically disadvantaged, which were defined by the Madison undergraduate initiative. People come from.
These are students with financial need.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. I like to call it that, students with financial need.
But that would be a much larger group than this group. But how the two interact, I think, is something that's really important to know.
It is, and as
You
far
want to help economically disadvantaged.
Sure,
students, for
right,
sure.
right.
And my guess is a large majority of these would be economically disadvantaged, and so they would be subsumed under a later program anyway. So I mean, that's where I agree with you. What's disadvantaged and what's otherwise
Right.
targeted
Right.
to minorities?
Right.
And where do they overlap? In which case?
Yeah. Yeah, my guess is, I think you're right, a number of these minorities come from lower income families, and you can see it in looking at the AOP grants and the Lawton grants, that minorities, African Americans, American Indians get considerably more than do other groups. And so, but my guess is if you included disadvantaged and you had a real grip on it, these numbers would be much, much larger. But to my mind, these are two separate categories, and let me explain why, and I digress. In 2005, after considerable interaction with the Board of Regents, I filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights in Chicago, alleging that the Lawton program is racially exclusive, and it clearly is. The only people who qualify are targeted minorities. Well, it's now more than 8 years, and this complaint of mine has not been resolved. I've got a file of letters that thick interacting with them, but they did tell me that in November, last November, they said they're currently negotiating with the UW system on the Lawton program. Now, what does that mean? I think it means that, well, who knows what it means? I probably shouldn't say. But negotiating means that they're trying to get some resolution of this thing. But then I found through another open Freedom of Information request that the Lawton program had been complained about in 1999. That complaint was never resolved. It came from Platteville. It was never resolved. And so there's been a complaint against the Lawton program since 1999. Here it is 2013, and nothing has happened. So anyway, all of this is very murky, contentious, and hard to resolve. Okay, so we've talked about all of that. Let's now move on to some of the implications of these numbers. Okay. Why don't you give me, let's see, the next one, I think. Yeah. One more. Skip that for now. There. Okay, I said, here are these programs. Who benefits from them? If we look at UW-Madison 2008, we've got $40 million. We've got roughly 40,000 students that year. That works out to cost of $1,000 in resources per student. And you could think of this as representing an investment that produces benefits that accrue to all students. But these M&D programs are, people program, advising minority students, et cetera. They all strike me as being focused on targeted minority students. So let's relax the constraint, go to the next one. If we take a look at the minority targeted, all minority students, and there are roughly 4,600 undergrad and graduate minority students in 2008, that works out to about $9,000 per year of resources devoted to per graduate, undergrad, minority student per year. If we then say, well, let's take a look at all targeted minority undergraduate students, this pushes the figure up to $20,000 per year. And then if we argue, as I have argued for a long time, that the purpose of minority programs is really to help targeted minority students who probably would not be admitted on a competitive basis, but are admitted under our preferential, now called holistic admission standard. And by my estimates made on now 3 occasions with data that are not generally available through the Provost's office, it works out that only about a quarter of the targeted minorities are admitted on the basis of preferences. You subtract out the rest, and so the resource costs are roughly $80,000 annually per targeted minority student who would not have been admitted based on their academic credentials, but are admitted on a holistic basis. And I have been arguing strenuously over the years that we don't necessarily do minority students a favor by admitting them when they're cannot be academically competitive, or certainly you would not predict that. When one looks at the UW system, of course, the figures are lower. If you take a look at the rest of the system, subtracting out UW-Madison, the amounts of resources available to them on a per student basis are much, much lower. I don't give the numbers here, but for example, the overall figure would be about $350 based on all students as against $1,000 here. So there are a lot of resources going into this, and the question is, what do we know about their effects? So let me turn to the benefits. Again, it seems to me that there's been a lot of talk about the benefits of minority disadvantaged programs, but nobody has, oddly enough, ever looked at the cost. The cost figures presented in Plan 2008 are very, very fragmentary. For people program, no projections. It's a sad commentary on things, and I was a vocal critic, I guess you would say, during the run-up to Plan 2008. I urged more information on what the cost would be so the faculty could make a better determination about whether or not to go ahead and endorse these programs. Now, for students who favor what we're now doing, you could think of them as being willing to gladly pay $1,000 a year or see $1,000 worth of resources allocated to a minority diversity program, and they might feel this is a real bargain. On the other hand, there are students who might be opposed to this, and they could view this as a kind of tax that they're forced to pay, or that the university pays on their behalf to promote M&D programs. What the sentiment here on campus is, I don't know. There was a statewide poll done now about 10 years ago, and it was about the preferences, minority preferences, and these polls always depend on the exact wording, but roughly 80% of the statewide population opposed any kind of preferences on the basis of race and ethnicity. So how this would work out in the student body, I don't know. ASM has generally been quite favorable toward these programs, and what the rest of the student population would say, I don't know. Now, the figures for a single year are not too revealing. We've been investing in minority disadvantaged programs beginning back in 1966 with a 5-year plan. And this was a plan developed by Ed Young, who was then the chancellor, and others in an effort to bring more minorities to Madison. And the idea was they would be supported over a 5-year period on the grounds it would take them an extra year because of less than adequate academic preparation. Well, that program did not succeed. In 1972, we adopted goals that we would have equal representation of minorities in the student body and the faculty by 1976. Anybody who knew anything about the numbers would have realized that would be impossible to achieve. As we approached 1976, it was put off to 1978 and 1982, and then it sort of fell into a black hole until Donna Shalala came along and introduced her Madison plan. And though most people don't realize it, the Madison plan did not succeed in its enrollment goals for targeted minority students. Neither did David Ward's Madison commitment in 1996. And so there's been a history of failure, in part because the goals have been utterly unrealistic. But let's go back. Why don't we next go back a couple of slides. Table 5. Okay, Table 5, what I've done here is to assemble these estimates I've made to give you the total costs, and it should be in 2012 dollars. I forgot to put that on here. The cost of Plan 2008, and then the cost of Plan 2008 plus the subsequent 5 years. And as you can see, Plan 2008, the 10-year plan, roughly $280 million in resource costs were devoted to Plan 2008. System, $700 million. If we add on the 5 years since then of apparently inclusive excellence, although the Regents adopted inclusive excellence in March 2009, I'm not sure Madison ever adopted it. And this gets into a whole issue of faculty governance, but I'll leave that aside. So if we add in the other 5 years, we're up to $500 million, $500 million, spent on M&D programs, not diversity programs, but just a subset of them, M&D programs, in the past 15 years. For a system, it's over $1 billion. Now, go back one slide, I think it is. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Forward, keep going. There, I think that's it. Now, the question arises, are we spending too much or too little on these M&D programs? When programs fail, government, federal government, whatever, people say, well, we didn't put enough resources into the programs. And therefore, we need more, and if you give us more, we'll do more. And I think that was Plan 2008. Actually, it was Madison Plan. We're going to allocate resources. We're going to make a real effort to make this thing go. Donna Shalala was here pushing it very actively. But it failed, and so David Ward comes along in 1994 with this Madison commitment. We're going to do even more to make this thing work. Well, it hasn't. And then we have Plan 2008, and now inclusive excellence is being rolled out, I guess, and presumably they will call for additional resources. The alternative is, can we make the programs that we currently have work more effectively? And that's a sore point. I have requested all kinds of records on many of these M&D programs to see whether they've been evaluated. And all I get back are basically annual reports. We did this, we did that, we gave these talks, and so on. Nothing to really assess the effectiveness of these programs in doing what they were set up to do. So that's very depressing. It means that we're spending money, we're not trying to find out what works, and so we keep on spending money, and we're not finding out how to do things more effectively. And then I go to the UW-Madison assessment of Plan 2008 that went to the, it was written in January 2009, went to the regents as UW-Madison's official report. In that report, there was a promise that 3 evaluations would be made. As far as I can tell, through open records, they have not been made. So again, what we have learned from Plan 2008 is not at all clear. And it strikes me as really peculiar because we have people in this room, my colleague Glenn Kane, raise your hand, Glenn, so they can see who you are. Yeah, he's trying to hide. And Tim Smeeding, Bob Haveman, all of them experts in program evaluation. They've done countless evaluations. They're leaders in the field. And I don't know whether you guys were ever called or not, probably not, because you would probably, you were too busy, or there might have been some fear about what you would find. But we have all kinds of evaluation experts on this campus, and none of them have been brought in to help evaluate these programs. Mike, you too. You're another guy. Okay, and Jay Stampen here. All of you could do this. Anyway, so are we spending too much or too little? How do we know? How can we decide the answer to this question? I would say we need a full press to evaluate these programs and find out what they're doing. And then last of all, how do we weigh the benefits of these programs against the costs? Bobby Wolf last week showed that students who graduated from universities and colleges that were more diverse, larger proportions of minority students, ended up having higher earnings in the few years after they graduated. And she attributed this to greater diversity. It made them better employees, and therefore employers rewarded them more generously. I haven't studied the paper closely enough to know to evaluate it. But how do we weigh the benefits and the costs? So with that question, let me stop and hear what you people have to say. Thank you very much. You guys better clap.
And for those of you who have a question, we need you to speak into the mic for the audio. So any questions?
Okay, you guys are writing notes to each other back there. I saw you.
Yeah, it's not about you. How are you going to write notes about you?
Yes. Good.
Hi, I'm Ryan Sirius, and I'm a PhD student in educational leadership and policy analysis. I did my undergraduate here.
You want to put the mic up a little closer?
Sorry. Did my undergraduate here, my master's degree here. Now I'm working on my PhD here. And one of the things that I'm very curious about is why it was that you decided to include ASM expenditures on diversity programming within your measurement. In the way that I conceptualize monies that are spent by ASM, those aren't institutional monies, those are student monies. And so including those those funds in your analysis inflates the kind of the expenditures that you're reporting. And the reason why I take issue with that is because I think that ASM in particular has poured money into diversity programming because they saw that our administration wasn't supporting minority students to the extent that they needed to. And as representatives of the student body, they decided to take issues into their own hands and provide those services and not take money from the administration to do it. Further, I would hope that the administration sees the fact that students are pouring a significant portion of their segregated fees into these diversity programs as an indication that they're not doing the things that they're supposed to. Also, to your point about the accountability and the, I'm sorry, I'm adding accountability into what you were talking about before, but particularly you're talking about evaluation and measurement of these programs. I agree that we've done a pretty poor job of doing large-scale evaluations and trying to figure out what works, building on what works. But I'm also a student representative on the current diversity planning committee, and that's one of the things that we are going to be addressing in this plan fairly centrally. But I just wanted to say I don't think that it's because people are afraid of what they'll find. I think that it's just maybe an oversight or just the culture of this university that people don't want other people, particularly central administration, poking around in their dusty corners. So,
Okay, let me try to respond. First, on the AOP program, the Minority Disadvantage Report put out by System has two parts. The first part is what I've talked about. The second part includes these racially exclusive or near exclusive programs. One is the Lawton program. The other is the AOP program. Both of those are included in the second part of the report, but no effort is made to put the first and second parts of the report together, which is what I've tried to do. On ASM has been cutting back on its expenditures on diversity. They were spending quite a bit back in the early 2000s. Sure, they're putting money in because they don't think the administration has put in enough, but a lot of people are putting in more money because people don't think there's been enough. There's been a big press to raise money for minority scholarships and grants, and people in the UW Foundation, including somebody I know quite well, that's been her exclusive job in the last 6 or 8 years. So, there's never enough money to satisfy the financial need of students. So, to my mind, any resources allocated to that end should be counted as part of the resources coming from all sources, which are used to promote minority and disadvantaged students, specifically recruitment, retention, and graduation. Now, on the evaluation, there are people in this room who I know who have attempted to evaluate programs here. And how should we put it? It's been very difficult to get access to the kind of data you would like to use to evaluate programs. And one person I know left in part discouraged by this kind of stonewalling. And I've requested data of the kind I've gotten previously on the admission rates, entrance rates, et cetera, for minorities, non-minorities. But I can't get them currently because they're not a part of the regular schedule. Previously, I knew people who would run these things for me. Now I don't. So, it seems to me that given the importance of this problem, given what Sandra Day O'Connor said, we hope this will go away in 25 years, we should have done much more to find out what really works. And it seems to me we call ourselves a major world-class research teaching institution. We're a world-class research institution in all of our disciplines and fields, but we're not in the workings of the university itself. Yes, Mike.
Mike Holnick from Ed Policy Studies and Sociology. I want to just try to think a bit and ask you to think and others more about how we address the question of who benefits.
Yeah.
Obviously, the question of what counts as a benefit and how we observe it is difficult enough. But I was struck when you came up with the $80,000 figure for taking the total expenditures on this and using the figure of the number of students who would not have otherwise been admitted, but for preference. That seems to me strange, since the programs serve a much greater number of people and are intended to. And the assumption that nobody but them, but they, need the kind of programming that's offered seems to me at least questionable. So that just raises generally the question of who ought we consider the beneficiaries.
Right.
Do we consider the beneficiaries to be only individuals who fit the categories that the program is addressed to, such that, for example, if we evaluated rec sports, we evaluate it solely on the students who are there? Maybe that's right. But on these kind of programs, there are some questions about collective goods that are at least plausibly related to having these kind of programs. And I think that's worth thinking about. And finally, if we're going to do, you haven't used the phrase, I don't think, cost benefit, but there's.
I tried to avoid that, not to incite you, Mike.
Okay. Seems to me there's two ways you could go about it. One would be assessing costs and then assigning dollar amounts to the benefits.
Right.
The other is to go beyond that and say, well, how efficient are these programs compared to other things we're doing with our money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do we know that this isn't more efficient than how we spend money in the engineering school?
Sure.
On academics?
Yeah.
How do we know anything about the rest of what we spend money on? And how does it compare with this? So
Sure.
that question of why we're isolating this and subjecting this to a standard of evaluation that we don't subject much of our activity to, I think, is worth asking.
Very good. You always ask good questions, Mike. On the looking at sports, recreational sports, maybe there's a benefit there. People like to associate with people who are very sports-minded. They may be healthier, less obese, et cetera. You could make the same argument there, I think, as you're making with respect to this. On the matter of the engineering school and so on, there are these accreditation teams that come through. There was Madison reaccreditation a couple of years ago, and I actually came to one of the meetings that they held in the Pyle Center, and it was like 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, and I came in and I sat way in the back. I wanted to be inconspicuous since I'm really not, no longer active. And finally, they convened the meeting. I was the only person there, so I had this wonderful conversation with the president of the University of Iowa, the provost from Purdue, and a couple of other luminaries. And but I didn't really bring this up, but what they looked at in terms of diversity in that accreditation report is minuscule. So a lot of things need to be evaluated. Why am I doing this? Because years ago, there was a week-long diversity week, and I went to the meetings, and that's where I first met Noel Radomski, who was representing David Ward. And I listened to all of this, and I thought, there's other information which I already had available, so I began writing about it in the Badger Herald, et cetera. So it's been a kind of a lonely mission, and indeed, as far as I can tell, very few faculty have done any research on these programs. And we have some people here who are involved in the diversity programs, and I'm not sure that they've done much either. Maybe they have. If they have, I'd love to hear about it. But I made these open records requests of a number of these 60-odd programs, and what I got back was really not very much. So there is clearly room for work for many of you who are students. Topic that is underutilized, under-researched, and you may be able to become famous as a result of what you do.
How do we evaluate things? How do we evaluate things for which there may not be a control treatment if there's only one site? You know, to evaluate this people's program as opposed to, I assume there's people like programs or people programs elsewhere.
Yeah.
This brought home to me a long time ago
Sure.
with the
You might need to take a course in benefit cost analysis.
No.
Yeah.
Right now I'm just worried about input output. Can you do it with one site? You can figure out the outcomes?
You can make best crack at it, absolutely.
Well then.
People
Yeah.
do that all the time.
Yeah.
Bob taught me a long time ago, anybody can estimate anything. It's how well you do it that counts, which is what we're at here.
Questioning any form is letting you.
One way to go at it is, Lee, we spend a lot of money in this campus just generally on making school affordable for disadvantaged students, on recruiting them, on retaining them, the whole Profs program, the SOAR program, and in graduation, okay? And I think you need to take those general revenues out, and I agree, if they're defined criteria as to who qualifies, those we would do, we don't care for yellow, white, black, brown, pink, or
Right,
whatever.
right,
Okay,
yeah.
take that out.
Yeah.
Then, at the end of the day, if WARF wants to raise money for minority students, okay, I got an Irish Catholic scholarship once. It's the same outfit that gave money to the IRA, but they also helped support me because I was a good South Buffalo boy and so forth. So if WARF wants to raise money specifically for whomever, the medical school does this, the business school does this, the Poverty Institute tries to do it, we don't get much in the way of donations, but and so forth, then I think you need to separate those monies out too, because it just so happens that is who people whose progress or whose exposure to what we have here, they deem that as a benefit. And then when you're done with all that, then we see what's left and what are we getting for what's left? Because part of it is that a lot of these programs, a lot of the monies that you're talking about would be spent in any case on students. And you do need to separate those out. Now, there are special monies for special students, but as you know, you're an economist like the rest of us, that, you know, if I give you $300 worth of food stamps or SNAP benefits, that frees up $300 you would have otherwise spent on food
Yeah.
to go somewhere else. So the accounting's a little difficult, but I do think that, you know, just in general, we should know. I thought the Madison Undergraduate Initiative was great. Every private school that I've been at, and a lot of them, they do exactly that. They discount tuition. There's a sticker price and a different price.
Right.
And that was great that we did that. I mean, that helps people who can't afford to go to school, which is important.
Right.
But then, after that, then I think you might be able to get a better handle on what it is you're after here. And that's just on the cost side. On the benefit side, who knows? If Bobby Wolf's estimates continue for a lifetime, that's a big number, right? And even if benefits exceed costs, then is this the most, obviously, the most efficient way of doing it? But there's a lot of more information that I think we need in order to be able to pull out these specific things. And I know you've been trying to get it.
Yeah.
So you're an advertisement of why we shouldn't spend the next 10 years of our time trying to figure this out.
Thank you very much. You hit it right on nail on the head in your last comments. But it's not what I need, it's what we need. As an institution, I think we could do much better in figuring out what we're doing in a lot of areas. And you know, maybe all this money should be transferred to the Poverty Institute. So, no, I know you don't. I know you don't. Right. But clearly, there's much to be learned, and unfortunately, there are very few people trying to learn what needs to be learned. And, you know, I'm retired. I could be out golfing, doing other things, fishing, although I don't like to fish. But this has become a preoccupation of mine, and because nobody else is doing very much. Jay.
Yeah, just over the long sweep of history of this institution, you see new groups come up, new groups arrive who haven't been in higher education much before, and I think what's happened every time a new group has showed up, the institution relaxes, and I think the first I learned about this was with the Norwegians, when they came here, and the university lowered the standards of, they needed a faculty member, so they got a guy with an honorary AB and from Milton College to head the Scandinavian department, and he was a real campaigner for getting Scandinavian students to come here. And then you mentioned the Irish scholarship. So this happens all along. So this has influenced my thinking. When on the minorities, that's the next group. And we relax and all that sort of thing. Now, one thing though, I agree with you on. In this
Only one thing?
No, it's an important point because I think in terms of this question about evaluation, the people program has been evaluated once. One of my students, Jungji Kim, did a dissertation on the people program. It was a formative evaluation, so it didn't measure ultimate effects, but it was intended to help the organization. We ran into a lot of trouble because of the attitudes of people running the program. So this was a big fight during the study to get those obstacles removed so they could do a legitimate study. But the attitude was that the faculty was against them, the people who were running the program. And so you couldn't, if you want, and you've run into this, if you want data, if you give it to him, he's going to turn it against you.
Yeah.
And so this was a deeply ingrained attitude in evaluation of that program. And it is counterproductive, obviously. I mean, the intent was to help the program become more effective, find out where the leverage was so you could exercise it to make things create a better yield. But it was stopped. I mean, it wasn't stopped, but it was greatly slowed, and it wasn't a satisfactory outcome. So I think the big point in all this is that we need to take serious evaluation of things that we're doing. As you say, we evaluate everything else that goes on in the world except what we're doing ourselves. And I think that's important that we do that.
Yes. Will.
My name is Will Clifton. I work in the Office for Equity and Diversity in Learning Communities. I'm not connected directly to the programs, though I work with many of the fine folks who are a part of these programs that you've been referring to throughout the presentation. You've just touched on a very important point, and I think that has to do with issues of trust, respect, inclusion. Folks, the history shows an awful track record here. We do awful things in communities. We, as a research institution, we go in and take from many, many communities and don't give back. And we've done it time and time again across the First Nations. There are people who clearly wish to avoid you, us, as a research community. This plays out. Have you actually established relationships with folks who don't reflect you? This is an issue of whiteness and power, and that is the truth about this. It may not be from your perspective, but it is a perspective that's lived on a daily basis through microaggressions and a whole host of things in play, and if you don't know about that, then you're not in community. I find this very,
You're saying you're not...
I'm very triggered by this. I'm very much raising feelings because we deny this. In these conversations, when we only crunch numbers, we wonder, we have been guilty historically for, no, I mean right now, literally, who is in conversation and community with each other? Who are you literally sitting down and being in conversation and saying, I understand the journey, or I'm in community with you, that you actually have trust established and respect established? I don't see it happening. I see people coming in and say, give me the numbers. Well, then I'm afraid you're not in community. You haven't been a part of these conversations. There is not guilty. It's not guilty, perhaps not participating, though.
Why don't you hand the mic over? Oh, okay. She'll speak.
I'm okay.
Good.
You can hear me.
Yes, I can. For the rest.
Well, so I just wanted to say thank you for your talk. You know, I've been corresponding with you for years with all your open record requests, so I appreciate that. Having to
Tell me, what is your name?
Dang Shonweerawong. I am the MD coordinator for School of Education.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, yes. Right.
I do.
Thank you.
I felt that, you know, I wanted to say something because I have my students here who are receiving funding from, I think as you refer as AOP, it's actually AOF, and it's Advanced Opportunity Fellowship from the graduate school that fund graduate students. And I wanted to correct the assumption that they are here because they're not, you know, not qualified to be here, but these are individuals that each department in the School of Education competitively recruit to be here.
Right.
Half of the money come from the graduate school. The other half come from WARF, I can't say it, but it's partly funded by all the research money that you all generated. And to say that they're not, you know, otherwise qualified to be here would be insulting to the rest of the faculty member who work really hard to recruit for them to be here. And not all of us are, you know, paid for by this money. So I want to make sure that we, you know, are conscious of that.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at me, you might thought that I'm one of the product of people who don't qualify or belong to be here, although I'm Asian, so just a joke. But, my education is paid for by my father.
Yeah.
So, who happened to be a rich man in Thailand.
Yeah.
So if he were an immigrant here, I would not have a shot at this opportunity and have earned a PhD, in which Professor Stampen was also one of my faculty. So it would be insulting of me to think that he let me pass because the way I look or what I am. But I just want to close with, I'm so proud to have all of my students here and that they choose to be here to listen to the comments and, you know, your research interests, and also to walk out of here having to think again about whether or not they are qualified and they belong here. And I wanted to you know, reassure to them and reaffirm to them that all of them are here because we recruit them and they chose us instead of Harvard,
Right.
instead of UC Berkeley, instead of much better ranking university.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate knowing who you are. But let me say this, the AOP program is very different. I'm talking about the undergrad programs. AOP, that's based on merit. And Department of Economics does not, you know, endorse people getting these fellowships unless they're very deserving. It's at the undergraduate level that I'm talking about. And the AOP program is there because it's in the system report and is part of money spent for minority diversity programs. Anyway, I don't mean to question the qualifications of any people getting in those programs. On the other hand, at the undergraduate level, and I've got data for 3 years classifying people by race, ethnicity, high school class rank, ACT scores, et cetera. And from about 1995, 2002, 2007, before John Wiley made his exit, he got them for me. So that shows a very different story. And that's what I'm really concerned about. And so.
We have one final question.
All right.
So Lee, let me make really a comment,
Sure.
which is partly a question. What did I learn here today? Okay, I learned a bunch about the actual numbers, and I truly value that information. I think without your having gone to the trouble to find out what is in these large reports and then adding your own best estimates to that, I would not have had any idea as to the magnitude of these costs, and I value that. I also learned something that I sort of already knew, but I learned from you about the difficulty of traversing the university bureaucracy, both at the campus level and the system level, when in fact what you're asking for is something that could be interpreted by the giver of information as a threat.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that this is a major problem, and I don't know how to react to the comment about engaging in the conversation and community, but I can tell you that nobody has the time to engage in enough conversation and community to be able to get estimates of the sort that you have, and I value that. Third, I think you're absolutely right about the need for a systematic evaluation of this program, as well as many, many, many other programs on campus. So I came away learning those things, and I value those things. Now let me make 3 other comments. First of all, I think you'd be doing yourself a favor in presenting here if you would at least step back and have a slide that said, okay, what are the list of potential benefits that could come from these efforts? You don't have to put dollar numbers by it.
Sure.
But you can have several items that would be categories of benefits. At least people could then think about what we're gaining here by the expenditure of these monies. Secondly, let me encourage you to put the results having to do with the numbers that you showed us into a paper that would be publishable and get it out there for other people to see. I think that would be a very valuable thing. And the third thing I'm going to say is something that I have to take my heart in my hand about. But your chances of getting this information out and published and taken seriously requires that you separate it from your own ideology. And I must say, your own ideology seeps through time and again as you make this presentation. And the comment that we just heard about preferential recruitment is one case of that. You didn't have to say anything in your talk about preferential recruitment and about the number of minority students who wouldn't be here if it weren't for preferential recruitment, to have your numbers have impact. So my comment to you is that you got to separate out your beliefs from what you've learned by your research, and that would make the impact of this whole thing bigger and more valuable.
Okay. Lee, I want to thank you. And
I just say one thing. I just feel it's a sad comment that the chancellor isn't here. Why not? I mean, he could have enlightened us in some way, or a topic. Do they consider this not sufficiently important? Think about it. Why isn't it?
for those, thank you. For those of you who have to leave, please leave. And Lee, if you'd like to give additional comments from any points brought up by the audience.
I'm thinking about this ideology issue. And you've been involved, Bob, in cost-benefit analysis. You know, a lot of people might regard that as an ideology. You've got to do a cost-benefit analysis to figure out everything. So it's hard to know, but I guess maybe I've been working on this for years, and you know, these odds against my getting information made it all very difficult. The OCR's behavior is, to my, I've got literally dozens of registered letters I've sent to officials. And I get back the cards, you know, they've received them, but no answer. So it's, why is everybody so hesitant to discuss these issues? And that's a problem. This is a difficult issue for many people to talk about. And getting to Will's point, I'm willing to discuss this with anybody. They may not like what I say, but it's very hard for me to find people who are willing to talk about these issues. And I think that's really sad in a university. Really very sad.
In response to what you just said,
Yes.
would you be willing to discuss however they would like you to say?
Pardon?
Discussion, in response to what you just said about a discussion,
Right.
being open to a discussion with someone that they may not like what you have to say,
Right.
that in itself is saying that's not a discussion, that is you sharing your perspective that pre-exists prior to the discussion. I think that's the sense of community that was spoken about, a mutual respect and understanding
Right.
that differing views make through a consensus.
May I add? Hi, I'm Dr. Jen Shucky. I'd like to also add that as a white person, I can't engage in those kind of conversations without unpacking my own issues. And my
Without what?
Unpacking my own issues, my own assumptions, my own biases. We all have biases here.
Sure.
We all guide our actions.
Right.
And given how race is a social construct and guides how we as a nation go forth, it's critical to be able to show that good faith as a white person, to be able to, for me, to be able to engage in conversations in a real way and listen, because it's about listening to other people's experiences who are not similar to mine and being able to take that into account to how I understand life. Life isn't how it is through my filter for everyone. Other people have different experiences.
Okay, I'm not complaining, but there's been only one occasion when anybody has asked me, other than this event right here, and I guess La Follette wants me to talk there, and that was Greg, what was his name? Greg, who was the involved in diversity programs back.
Greg Vincent.
Greg Vincent, yes, Greg Vincent. And we had a public debate one night, and, I knew him, he knew me. It was a very enlightening evening. And, but I'm willing to talk about this, but maybe you're saying that people wouldn't want to talk to me because I have these biases that would show and that would cut off conversation. I don't think so. Okay, you've all endured much too much. Allow me to let you depart. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate all of your comments. And if anyone wants to talk to me, fine.